This is a terrifying story of one of the most horrifying and brutal crimes in American criminal history. On the evening of November 18, 1987, police went to the mobile home of 29-year-old Russell Keith Dardeen outside Anna, Illinois, United States, after he had failed to show up for work that day. When the police arrived, they found the bodies of Russell's wife and son bearing the marks of a brutal beating. Russell's wife, 30-year-old Ruby Elaine Dardeen, was pregnant with the couple's daughter, and she had been beaten so badly she had gone into premature labor. After she gave birth, the depraved killer or killers had also beaten the innocent newborn to death. Welcome to this channel. Today we are going to take a look at the chilling story of the Dardeen family murder. Before we continue, please like, share and subscribe to get notified about our latest videos. And now, let's take a look at the sad story of the Dardeen family murder. Russell Keith Dardeen, his wife Ruby Elaine Dardeen, and their 2-year-old son. Peter relocated to Anna, Illinois in 1986. Both of them preferred to use their middle names, Keith and Elaine. Keith was a native of Mount Carmel, and he bought their mobile home, which was a beige and white trailer, in 1986. They rented land for their mobile home, close to Keith's job from a nearby farming couple. Keith was a diligent worker, and his wife had secured employment at an office supply company in Mount Vernon, the county seat of Jefferson. Elaine became pregnant with the couple's second child in 1987. Depending on whether the child was a boy or a girl, they had chosen to name him or her Anna Casey. Keith and Elaine had seriously considered moving because of the impending birth of the child, and by the end of the year, they had listed their mobile home for sale. However, that was not the only reason why Keith wanted to move. According to Joan Dardeen, Keith's mother, Keith had said he would move back to Mount Carmel even if he was unable to find a job there, before doing so, as he regretted ever having moved to Anna. He told her that the area was becoming too violent and dangerous for him and his family, and he wanted to keep his family safe. There had been 15 homicides in Jefferson County during the previous 2 years, starting with those committed by Thomas Odell, a Mount Vernon teenager who had killed his parents and 3 siblings as they returned to the house one night in 1985. Even though Odell and several of the murder suspects in the other murders had been found guilty, the residents of the R had grown anxious and scared. Following the rape and murder of a 10-year-old girl in the neighborhood in May 1987, a friend of Keith's claimed that Keith became so protective of the family. One night, when a young woman knocked on the door of the mobile home to ask if she could come in and make a phone call, Keith allegedly refused to let her in. On November 18, 1987, Keith, who was usually a reliable worker, failed to show up for work. Calls to his home remained unanswered all day, and he had not called to let his boss know that he wouldn't be able to come to work that day. Keith's parents, who were divorced but continued to reside close by in Mount Carmel, were both phoned by his supervisor, who was concerned as he knew that this was out of character for Keith. Neither of them was aware or had any idea what might have happened to their son. Keith's father, Don Dardeen, called the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and offered to drive to Anna with the house spare key and meet deputies at his son's house. When they got to the trailer, they knocked on the door, but nobody answered, so they forcefully opened the door and entered. The sight they found was so horrifying and brutal that it would haunt them all for the rest of their lives. Elaine, Peter, and a newborn girl's body were all tucked into the same bed. Elaine had been bound and gagged with duct tape, and both had been beaten to death, apparently with a baseball bat that had been given to Peter as a birthday gift by his father. The baseball bat was found at the crime scene. Elaine had been beaten so severely that she had gone into labor and delivered a girl 2 months before her due date. The killer had shown no mercy for the newborn baby, who soon met with the same fate as her mother and brother. Elaine had a cracked skull after receiving a blow to the right side of her head. and Peter had multiple bruises and cuts in addition to a fractured skull. But Keith was nowhere to be found. Police could not also find his vehicle at the scene. He was declared wanted by the police, as they initially suspected him of killing his wife and children. Sadly, the search for Keith came to an end late the next day, when some hunters discovered his body in a wheat field close to the trailer. Keith has received 3 gunshot wounds, and his private part was also served. His vehicle was soon found, about 11 miles south of the Dardeen residence, parked in front of the Benton police station, with blood all over it, leading the police to believe that he was murdered inside his car. News of the killings made the locals even more terrified than they had already been. Many of them began going about their daily business, with shotguns visible in their vehicles. After high school basketball games, students were told to wait in the school building, for their parents to come in and accompany them to the parking lot, for their ride home, instead of hanging around outside and socializing, as they normally did. Early reports from the police about the crime were limited, and sometimes contradictory, allowing rumors to spread. The county's coroners differed on whether Keith had died of a head injury or being shot. Among those who reported the former, it was said that it had been inflicted when he was dragged from his car. The circumstances under which Elaine gave birth to her short-lived daughter also gave rise to stories that Casey, as the family called her, had been ruthlessly ripped out from her mother's womb. Along with the mutilation of Keith's genitals, this gave rise to speculation that Satanists were active in the area and had performed a ritual sacrifice of the family. Due to the social unrest, the local police agencies quickly joined forces with the Illinois State Police to investigate and solve the crime. A total of 30 detectives worked full-time following leads and interviewing over 100 people. Sadly, none of what they found could help them in finding the murderer. Nobody who knew the Dardeens had anything negative to say about them, and although a tiny amount of marijuana was discovered in the trailer, it was not enough to prove they were dealing. Police even suspected that the marijuana was unintentionally left there by the killer or killers. The autopsy revealed that none of the victims had used narcotics or drunk alcohol. The coroners put the time of death for all the Dardeens at within an hour of each other. Determining the motive of the perpetrators was a particularly difficult part of the case. The back door had been left open, and there was no evidence of forced entry. A VCR and camera were in plain sight in the living room. Elsewhere in the house, equally accessible cash and jewelry remained, leading police to believe that robbery was not a motive for the crime. There was no evidence of rape or sexual assault, and the police also found no evidence of any extramarital affairs involving either Keith or Elaine that might have motivated the other party to a jealous rage. Joan Dardeen also suggested that the murders may have been motivated by rage, saying, "I think someone wanted Keith to sell drugs, and he refused. Or there's a possibility someone liked Elaine, and she wouldn't accept his advances, and he took out his rage on both of them." Investigators finally got a break in the case. On the last day of 1999, a serial killer cut the throats of 2 girls near Del Rio, Texas. One of his victims survived, and the killer was soon identified by police as Tommy Lynn Sells. Sells was eventually convicted and sentenced to death for that murder and another one earlier in 1999, where he had killed a girl in San Antonio. While he was in prison, awaiting trial on the first murder charge, Sells began to confess about other murders he had committed. One of the murders he talked about was the Dardeen family murder. Sells said he did not remember the details of all the crimes he admitted to, which he describes as a coping strategy from the sexual abuse he endured as a child, but he did remember that one. In the mid-1980s, Sells was living primarily near St. Louis and making money from working at traveling carnivals and fairs as a day laborer or through theft. Sells would often hop freights or hitch rides with truckers without any particular destination in mind. Anywhere a ride was going, I was heading that way. Might be in Illinois today and Oklahoma tomorrow, Sells said. On one trip through Jefferson County in November 1987, he claimed to have met Keith at a truck stop near Mount Vernon, or, as he would later claim, at a local pool hall. In both versions, however, he said Keith invited him home for dinner. After the meal, he claimed he was simply planning to move on, when Keith triggered his anger by sexually propositioning him, in one account to a threesome with Elaine. He'd forced Keith at gunpoint to drive to where his body was found, killed, and mutilated him, then returned to the trailer to kill Elaine and Peter, as they were witnesses to the crime. He said that he also murdered Elaine and 2-year-old Peter as a result of uncontrollable rage that Keith's alleged sexual offer had set off in him. Sells also gave another version of his story. In this version, he did away with the encounter with Keith and the sexual proposition entirely. In this version, he claimed that he got off a freight he had hopped on near Ina. After drinking beers and waiting for the right time, he knocked on the door and told a wary Keith he was interested in buying the trailer. He then overpowered Keith, made him bind and gag his wife and son with duct tape, and forced him to drive his car to the nearby field at gunpoint, where he sliced Keith's pennies off and shot him. At the trailer, he raped Elaine, then beat Peter, Elaine, and the newborn to death. After cleaning up, he drove Keith's car to Benton. To some investigators, Sells' 2014 execution by the state of Texas was justice for the Dardeens as well. Sells was never charged with the murder of the Dardeen family, but he remains the one suspect, Jefferson County State's Attorney Douglas Hoffman said a week after the execution. But they agree that Sells may have added details to his story, as he was known to do, which has left considerable doubt about many of the killings he confessed to. Other investigators believe that, while Sells' account is consistent with the general facts of the case, most of what he said had previously been reported publicly. So many years has passed since the brutal murder of the Dardeen family, and the case is still open and unsolved. There are many questions yet to be answered about this case. Was Tommy Lynn Sells the killer? Or was this murder perhaps the work of another serial killer or a satanic cult? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this video interesting, then hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos. Thanks for watching.